She measures just over 174 meters in length, has 8 decks, and a crew of 450. But the Africa Mercy is more than just a ship. With 90 nurses, 15 doctors, 78 beds, and 6 operating suites, she's more like a floating civilian hospital that treats millions of people around the world who don't have access to the care that they need. On today's Newsmaker, we sit with chairman of the Swiss branch of Mercy Ships, Roland Decorvet. So Roland, thank you so much for being our Newsmaker today. It's such a pleasure.
Same here, yes, very much.
And to be here at the Lausanne headquarters of Mercy Ships.
Yes, this is an amazing house. Definitely older than Mercy Ship because it's an 18th century house, but this is our head office and you're more than welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm curious because I know Mercy Ship was founded in 1978, right, by Don and Deyon Stephens, Americans.
That's right.
But it's not headquartered in America. It's headquartered here in Lausanne.
Actually, it has dual headquarters. It has a headquarters here and also one in America, next to Tyler in East Texas. So
okay.
We are both European and American.
But why? Why Switzerland?
I think they were here, they were working here, and they really had this vision of helping Africa through ships, through hospital ships. Yeah, so it's interesting that Switzerland doesn't have is not bordering any oceans or sea, and despite that, but you know, Switzerland has proven over the last few years that we can even win the America's Cup a couple of times without having an ocean, so we're quite versatile and adaptive.
Well, this is true. Fair enough. Fair enough. But and also the fact that it's Lausanne and not Geneva, because Geneva, of course, is home to so many nonprofits.
That's right. So I mean, Don and Deyon were working here in Lausanne for a Christian organization, and this is where they were based. But yeah, we're very proud that the whole story, 40 years plus ago, started here. And
when did your paths cross, yours and Don's?
Actually, it started with my family. My dad, when my dad was he's a pastor here in French-speaking Switzerland, and got to know Don and Deyon, and introduced them to a little bit his network here in Switzerland to make Mercy Ship and the organization that we're working for before more aware and more recognized.
Okay.
And they started a friendship, and that's where we've been family friends for this almost 40 years. Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so your story with Mercy Ship really does go back almost because it's
yes,
40th anniversary
at the
this
beginning
year, no?
With my parents, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I got only involved when I came back from China to be the CEO of Nestlé for Switzerland, and then they asked me to be a member of the board in Switzerland, and then after of the international board. Yeah.
And what kind of man is Don?
I think he's a visionary. He's a visionary and an entrepreneur. You know, to have this vision, and this is where I don't think America has the monopoly of entrepreneurs and visionaries, but there's something in America which breeds this kind of bigger than life men or women with this kind of, you know, no frontier, almost impossible to do kind of tasks, and he's one of them.
Okay.
I don't know if he talking about the sea, grew up in Colorado, and just like Switzerland, we're not exactly close to any sea. So I don't know if it's to do with the mountains, that's possible, but maybe with the fact of, if you're in the mountains, you want to see the horizon, but also most importantly, really the drive to do something different, to help. At that time was not just Africa, Mercy Ship was also doing quite a bit in the Caribbean and South America, but how to basically reach people who had no access to healthcare whatsoever.
Right.
The forgotten people, the poorest of the poor, who never see a doctor, who never see an operational room, who never get any medicines. And a ship is a perfect way to access these people. It's also a relatively safe way. You can access a port, and if in a worst case scenario there's a political event, violence or whatever, as a ship you can leave immediately. Obviously when you build a hospital or something in bricks, it's a bit more difficult. So it's flexible, it's safe, it reaches any corners of the world. That was a brilliant idea.
And do you find that when you pull up to these ports in these different countries, you are welcomed by, for example, the local governments? Do they cooperate with you?
Yes, very much. I think we are welcomed everywhere, at least the countries I've been involved with in Africa, which probably is a dozen countries. Because we also, we tackle we are a surgery ship, so we're not a treatment ship. We don't take care of chronic medicines, but we operate surgical ship, and we operate and we take care of people which nobody takes care of. So it's not like we're competing with local doctors or we're perceived as a threat or whatever. Yeah, so most presidents welcome us because, let's be very honest, sometimes they can take some political advantage of us coming. We don't do any politics. We really don't care what we want. It's just welcome us, put some place at disposal in the port, and allow us to reach your people who need care.
And what exactly is your role?
So presently I'm the chair of the Mercy Ship in Switzerland. I'm also chair of Mercy Ship in South Africa, and I'm one of the vice chair of Mercy Ship International. Okay. But I was also for about a year, a bit more than a year, managing director of the hospital ship. We lived with our family on board the ship for 1 year.
I want to talk about that in just a moment. But before we do that, you mentioned how your father back in the day was helping to build awareness, was brought in sort of to help spread the word about Mercy Ship and what Don and Deyon were doing and what their vision was. But right now, in your role, do you still continue this? I mean, are you also attracting funds? Are you raising money? Are you building awareness?
No, exactly. So I think, when I left, I had a decently important position in Nestle, and then I left
the business chairman world. Of Nestle China.
And so it created quite a big noise level in Switzerland in this time. And there was a good opportunity to really explain to people that, who we are, and be able to try to present the organizations to the masses to say, please come and join us. And there's different ways people can help. This is what we're doing now as an office, as a team. We raise funds because obviously
somebody has to pay. I mean, the care is free, right, for the patients when they come on board.
But exactly,
somebody has to pay.
And we don't get any funding from governments or government institutions. It's 100% private gift.
Okay.
But also we need volunteers because we have 440 crew members. But every year we have about 1,600 people coming on board the ship because there's a high rotation. So we need to find these volunteers, from doctors to nurses, but also...
And training, right, of all these
we need
people?
to train them, but also... it's a floating village, so we have from accountant to banks, with our own banks, to post office, to chef, cooks, cleaning ladies, cleaning men, whatever. We need to, whole spectrum of different specialties and skills.
What does it take to run that ship for, let's say, a year? What kind of investment is that?
Well, in terms of money?
Yes.
If I remember correctly, I think the crew fees is about $400 to $500 a month. This is for lodging and food. Mm-hmm. So that's probably about I would say $5,000 for a year, $5,000 to $6,000, $7,000 a year.
A year per person.
Per person, yeah.
Per person. Okay, so yeah.
But yeah, we need to find funds for medicine, transportation, everything else, volunteers, and we have a second ship coming in 1.5 years, which will be double the size of the one we have now. So a lot of things to do.
As I understand, there was a big donation made by an American couple towards that.
Yes, so we have now found most of the funds for the ship, as in for the assets, which is a picture here.
This is the new one?
This is the new one, yeah.
Okay.
So this is a very, very large ship. We're talking...
Twice
this is
as
basically
big.
A cruise ship.
It looks like a cruise ship.
It's a cruise ship,
yeah.
Except it's helping people, although I guess cruise ship help people to relax, but this is healing people, yeah. So this is very big. This will be two floors of full-fledged hospitals, 7 operation rooms, training rooms, very, very large ship.
And what did you say that the price tag was on this?
The ship price is about $130 million,
okay,
and about $50 million additional for medical equipment.
And you're just about there?
We're just about there, yeah, exactly. We found the funding. So now the biggest challenge will be the funds for the running expenses, obviously,
right?
which we'll do it on a yearly basis, but we have offices all over the world to do that. And frankly, even the bigger challenge is people, because here we'll need about 3,000 people a year to really come and go.
On a volunteer basis?
On a volunteer basis.
Wow.
And that's also a challenge. So we're confident, but it's so we'll have the two ships running, one more on the west of Africa, one more on the east of Africa.
I mean, I'll be straight with you. I mean, especially now at the end of the year, my mailbox, my inbox is full of people requesting donations for all kinds of organizations. Yeah. So we know it's a crowded landscape out there, yeah. Especially in Switzerland, because there's a reputation of people have money in Switzerland. So let's go raise funds here. Why would I give to Mercy Ship, for example, and not another organization?
So first of all, I would like to say that I don't think we have the monopoly of the heart, meaning that there's plenty of great organizations out there who are doing great work. So it's not like, I feel it a little bit different from my business day-to-day work, where you are in a competitive landscape, and indeed it's the tough, rough life and world of business. I see it slightly different when it comes to Mercy Ships, where we are actually working also with a lot of other NGOs on the ground, because we want other NGOs to continue what we've started in the different countries and etc. So I'm not saying there are no competition. I'm saying I'd like to believe that this competition is a little bit different from a business competition. This being said, I think the amazing part of Mercy Ships, it's because of the voluntary concept of people spending and paying for their stay, from the managing director, which I was, to the top surgeons, to the cleaning lady. The amount of the money given by the individuals going for the concerns patients is much higher than any organization, because any other organization normally has to pay the salary, has to pay the plane tickets of the people going there. All of this is taken away and is not included in your gift. So if you're giving, normally a certain percentage has to be paid for the cost of all these peoples. In our case, none.
Right.
So the amount of percentage of money going straight to the patient is obviously much better because of the model of the organization. Secondly, we're touching, like I said, people. The vast majority of the people we operate on have never ever seen a doctor in their life. So we really focus on patients which have never seen any doctor, and therefore I would say that transforming lives is just amazing, and we also take care of operations which are pretty impressive, like facial tumors and very advanced conditions. But other organizations are doing it as well. So if you ask me, I would encourage you to help. There's a lot of people out there, and a lot of people need help. We're not the only one.
So I want to go back now quickly, before we wrap up this first part, to that year that you spent on Mercy Ship as a managing director, together with your family. You said your wife and your 4 girls.
Yes.
I mean, when you look at these images of being out at sea, and what crosses your mind? What really stands out for you?
First of all, when you see the ship cruising in high sea, one of the part we sailed from Canary Islands all the way to Cape Town. It was about a 3-week trip.
Okay.
And we crossed, so while on the board we worked, and obviously not with patients, but preparing. And then my girls were in school, so the school was on board the ship, and we crossed for a whole week. We had a massive storm where the ship was rolling 30 degrees on each side, and it was quite an event. Sleeping on the floor and rolling in day and night. That was looking at the high sea. That's it. But more importantly, that's an instrument. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an amazing experience to be part of a team which is helping transform lives. I guess if you're a doctor, it's probably something more common. If you're a businessman, what's your chance to actually be part of something where you see people's lives being actually transformed? And that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
And any big learning that you were able to apply from your days at Nestle, for example?
Yeah,
you were on the ship?
Yes. Well, I left Nestle by then, but I would say to business life, I often say that was to me the best business school ever. And often people say, what do you mean? Well, you're managing 440 crews from 45 different nationalities. Now, in the business life, how do you drive, how do you motivate people? Through bonuses, through career plans, if it doesn't work, through threats. Here you're managing 440 volunteers who don't get paid, who don't have a career plan because they only work for 3 months, and usually threatened volunteers might not be a very good idea anyway. So you realize that everything's about communication, everything's about motivation. And I think, frankly, in today's world, in today's companies with today's people, mostly millennials, but not only, it's all about communication. It's all about motivate them. So to me, it was and I often advise people, nothing wrong with business schools, but you want to learn about management, join such an organization for a few months. It's substantially cheaper, and you learn much more.
Mercy Ship is such an amazing initiative to help. It's like a floating hospital that helps people who can't afford otherwise to get the kinds of treatment that they need. And you can hear all about it in part 1 of this interview, so you'll have to go back and watch that, because now I would like to move on to Africa, called the New Last Frontier. You split your time between Europe and Africa, as I understand it. Now you're in South Africa.
Correct.
Tell me from your perspective, from where you are, how you see the development now in Africa.
Well, first of all, not only I believe that Africa is indeed the last frontier, but just to remind your viewers that I did spend 20 years in Asia, 15 of them in China. So nothing wrong with China today, but I think I arrived in China in 92. I went through the amazing growth years in China, and I was part of it for 20 years. But I believe this time is done, in the sense that the level of development and the level of, I would say, openness is quite different from what it was 30 years ago. I think now what I see in quite a few countries in Africa is what I used to see 30 years ago in China. Of course, it's more complex. Of course, it's more diverse. Africa is made of 54 countries. But yes, Africa is the continent, the only continent actually in the world with a growing population. The growth of the economy is not as fast as Asia, but it's still substantially faster than Europe or America. To your point,
that the World Bank says that the 4 of the fastest growing economies in the world in 2019 were African. So Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Rwanda.
And so I would make would advise people to be careful talking about Africa. You don't have one Africa. You have many Africas. Unfortunately, Africa still makes the headlines for a few reasons based on what's happening in a few given countries. But the vast majority of countries in Africa are going in the right direction. Is it fast enough? Not. But it is moving in the right direction politically, from a demography point of view, from a development point of view, from a growth point of view, from a potential point of view, and that's very exciting.
And what are some of the countries that are leading that growth?
So there's quite a number, but I would say there are countries which are already ahead. Everybody talks about Rwanda, of course, but Rwanda is a very small country. Another great country we very much believe in is Ethiopia. We often forget Ethiopia has been growing 10%. The economy has been growing 10% for the last almost 10 years.
What's been driving that?
100 million people.
For that?
Well, I think Ethiopia is managed by very competent people. And we can debate about the whole democratic exercise, but recently they have an amazing prime minister, but even before that, Today, Addis Ababa to me looks like Beijing when I arrived in '92, meaning strong government involvement, infrastructure being built like there's no tomorrow. You know, Addis Ababa has a subway that many European cities don't have. So, yeah, let's be careful when we judge a country, because a lot of things is happening.
And how much of this growth is being driven by foreign direct investment?
Not enough. There is obviously FDI coming into Africa, but I think that's one of the issues which hopefully we can help transform, is that Africa needs more investment. And one of the issue I have with sometimes investors is, because Africa is more perceived risky, and therefore I expect a higher return of investment. And even though it might sound logical, I personally don't agree with that, in the sense that Africa, you know, when people started new ventures and when you start new industries in the West, you have a sort of risk, but you're somehow willing to take this risk. While in Africa, there's this kind of, many people are just afraid to go there, while I think in every new ventures there's a risk. But
isn't it justified to some point?
Well, it is justified in a way, but how will Africa ever grow? You know, in the sense that the first people came to China 30, 40 years ago, there was also a high risk. So I think, again, Africa needs, I'm a very big fan of the concept of industrializations. The biggest issue in Africa, it's a trade economy. Why is a trade economy? I'm not going to go into history lessons, but I think we Europeans, i.e. Western European Americans, have a big role to play, that we never truly develop Africa. We went there, we took things to our country, and we basically added value in our own country. We're in Switzerland. Do you know that Switzerland exports twice as much coffee as cheese or chocolate? Okay, that's a fact. So because, okay, we're adding value here, but that's in a way not what Africa needs. I'll tell you a story linked also with Mercy Ship. The first time Mercy Ship went to West Africa was about 30 years ago plus, to Benin. Benin is just next to Nigeria. And when the ship arrived, Don Stephens, the founder, had a reception with the president of Benin, and the president of Benin told Don, Mr. Stephens, this ship full of white people is the first ship in 500 years that came here not to steal, not to rape, not to basically exploit and suck us dry. That's the first ship which came to bring and to give something, okay, on top of it for free. And without wanting to be, you know, going into politics and changing history that our forefathers did, our role, my company's role, is to help, not charity, not to give money, but to create jobs, is to industrialize Africa. That's the first and foremost need of this continent.
I mean, from an outside perspective, it feels like there's so many interests at play, foreign interests at play in Africa. Almost feels like it happens behind the curtain somehow, you know, but behind the scenes, you actually have such a power play happening. Do you feel this? Is this something that you also experience?
Yes. There's a theory, I heard somebody, I forgot who said the biggest event which happened for Africa was not the decolonization, but was '89, the end of the Cold War. Because basically Africa was the playing ground or fighting grounds between the West and the East. And if you look at the end of the Cold War, basically took a lot of investment, a lot of support out of Africa, because there was no reason for, or perceived reason for some people to help it. I think now at least the help which comes is a bit more natural, if you want.
Okay.
But if you're referring to the Chinese and you know, coming into Africa, yes, it is. Again, that's what I mean. It's again a trading economy where people coming to take raw materials for their own sake, and that has to stop somehow.
And so this is the role you feel China and other countries is playing?
Yeah, I think, a lot of countries are not investing enough. Chinese are looking after their own interests. I have my personal view, but again...
What is that?
First of all, as Europeans, are we really allowed to criticize? In a sense, what have we done? What have we done since independence? When I was on the ship in Pointe Noire in Congo, the Chinese president came to inaugurate the highway between Pointe Noire and Brazzaville.
Okay.
But Congo-Brazzaville was independent from France since 1960. What have the French done? Why didn't they build the highway? So, I would be careful to criticize too much the Chinese. That will the Chinese think of their own interest? Yes. But you know what? Everybody does. So, yes, I think there is a downside to the Chinese involvement in Africa. From an agriculture point of view, I think it's not very sustainable. And I think that they do not allow the local industry to grow because they flood the markets with their own goods. That I would be quite critical. But the fact that they're against mining rights or whatever, they're building bridges and roads and so on, at least they're doing something. How many bridges or highways or airports have US AID or the French or the British built in Africa the last decades? Not many. A few, but not many.
I mean, one of the other challenges faced by, I would say, a grand part of Africa is the youth unemployment. And actually, to that point, we had a recent interview with Borge Brende from the World Economic Forum. I'll play that for you so you can give me your thoughts.
In Africa, it is opportunities for the youth. In South Africa, where we are now, youth unemployment is 50%. And that is not sustainable. You cannot continue with half of the young population not being part of the ordinary work and labor market. So it has to be upskilling, reskilling, it has to be investments. You really have to build a future for the youth of Africa. And being the youngest continent in the world, the future belongs to the youth, but they also have to have a future, and that is about jobs and education, and that is not only an African responsibility. I think we all have to support and partner with Africa to create a future for all the young people on this continent.
Yeah, no, fully agree. Talking about, and we'll talk maybe later about our company, what industries can utilize millions and millions of workers? This is why I believe agriculture and food processing are really one of the key pillars of Africa's growth, because it can use millions of people, which is a bit more difficult if you build more specialized type of factories. It has a potential, but it's going to take much more time. Food, agriculture is the future, because it's where there's plenty of land available, there's plenty of people, and there's plenty of need.
So could Africa feed the world?
Well, I would even go much further than that. I would reverse that. I would say the world can only be fed thanks to Africa. And that's the FAO saying it, the United Nations. So if you look at the statistics, 70% of the worldwide arable non-cultivated land is in Africa. So the only way we're going to feed 10 billion people on this planet if we start cultivating some of this land. I think we all agree what's happening in Brazil is not sustainable. We're not going to burn the whole forest to make it, fill it with sugarcane or soya fields. America is already full. Europe, we're moving towards bio, which actually has a lower yield per hectare. So actually our total production in Europe will shrink. Then where are we going? In China, the farming land is shrinking as well because the city is expanding. This is all public knowledge. So the only place where we can start growing more is Africa. And that's the big paradox of Africa, because Africa is struggling to feed itself, but it's actually going to be the only way we're going to feed the world.
And with, what, more than 400 million people living in extreme poverty.
Yeah. But again, the misperceptions. Africa has a lot of land. By the way, most of Africa has a lot of water. There's these misconceptions, and we often talk, rightly so, that it is an issue in the Sahel and in part of Somalia. And
but isn't South Africa running out of water?
And South Africa, part of South Africa. But the masses in Africa, the biggest part of Africa, has plenty of water. Water is not the main issue in Africa.
So talk to me about climate change. What role is that
Yes,
playing?
obviously it has an impact everywhere, but the point is how to basically, first of all, another challenge in Africa is you've got on one side plenty of land. I often tell my African friends, I come from Switzerland, a country where 6 months a year the soil is hard like a rock. We have one harvest a year. In Africa, you've got 2, if you're lucky, 3 harvests a year. Who's the lucky one? Okay? So the point is, you've got in Africa good land, water, lots of farmers. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got 1.3 billion consumers. However, these 1.3 billion consumers still import $70 billion worth of food on a yearly basis. How is that possible? It's possible because you don't have the transformer. So again, if you don't, you grow a lot of stuff, but 50% gets rotten before it reaches the end consumers, because you can only sell fresh products, or the roads are so bad that it cannot reach the cities. That's the problem. What you need is a transformation industry which transforms the local crops into finished products, be it mangoes into puree, concentrate, be it cassava, which we're doing, into flour, be it nuts into roasted nuts, etc., etc.
This is part 3 of our Newsmaker interview with Roland Decorvet. He is chairman of Mercy Ship Switzerland, but he is also the CEO and founder of a company called Philafrica Foods based in South Africa. Thank you so much for being with us again, Roland. It's a pleasure. Now, the word Phil means love in Greek.
Cool. Good.
So hence the name Philafrica.
Correct.
I assume this is why Africa.
Yes, and I would say even more, actually more than loving Africa, I often say loving Africans. This is more about the people than the place, actually.
And this is what brought you ultimately back from Nestle, so first Nestle, and then Mercy Ship, and then now Philafrica.
Exactly, so kind of from one extreme to another and finding the right balance. I often say, I think I worked 23 years for Nestle, and it was basically 23 years of formation, of training, even though well paid and lots of hard work, to basically finally do what I think I was born to do, which is do this company, which is really a combination, which is business, but business with a purpose. Actually, our tagline of Philafrica Food is food with purpose.
You said you followed a deeper calling.
Yeah, I think basically, we all have different ways and means we can achieve our dream, and one of my dreams has always been to combine business with a strong social impact. And I think we live in a world where too often it's either or. It's either you are in business and you only look at the return on investments at whatever cost, or you are in NGO or in missionary or social work where you save the world, but no business interest. And I think what Africa needs today is jobs. What Africa needs is exemplary leadership. What Africa needs today is industrialization. And what we're trying to do now, we already have 20 factories across the continent, is really capitalism, but capitalism with a purpose, capitalism, more patient capitalism, and less greedy capitalism. Nothing wrong with return on investment, nothing wrong with making money, but please be patient and don't be greedy.
Now, in reality, you are a white man, so you've come to Africa to help the Africans. I mean, do you ever find that there's an issue?
So first of all, I don't see my work as coming and helping. I'm coming to create jobs. So we're not giving out handouts for people to survive. We are creating industries, we are creating factories, we are helping farmers to basically supply to us at a good price their crops. So that's exactly the point. I think you raise a good point that this is not about helping. And I think Helping has to be an outcome of what you do. If what you do is a sustainable business model where you respect people and you pay people the right price, and you have a smart business model, meaning where you don't beg people to buy your product, but you sell it because they need it, then ultimately you help people.
Talk to me about this business model, because we touched on it in the second part of our interview where you said you were covering, kind of filling in a missing piece.
Yeah, I think when people ask me, what are you doing? I said, well, I worked 23 years with Nestle, being a CEO, and some time or so in the NGO. So imagine Nestle and the NGO worlds combined. That's more or less what we're trying to do, meaning that, again, how to make sure that Africa gets more and more self-sufficient from a food point of view. Again, Africa is the richest country, richest continent on earth when it comes to potential of agriculture, and is the least sufficient. That's a massive paradox.
So in other words, the resources leave Africa, they're processed somewhere else, and then Africa has to re-import them. In very simplistic
examples.
terms.
One of the biggest cashew nuts produced in the world is Ivory Coast.
Okay.
I could use the example of chocolate, but let's use cashew nuts. It's even more extreme. You go in a Carrefour, in a shopping center in Abidjan, you buy a bag of cashew nuts. There's 99% chance that the cashews comes from Ivory Coast, have been put in the containers with their shell, are shipped all the way to India, where they are broken, they are repacked, shipped to Europe, where they are roasted and packed and sent back to Africa. This is an absolute nonsense, now obviously ecologically anyway, but even economically. So how to basically feed Africa with what it has. And we have also lots of opportunities. We're doing things with poultry, we are quite big in poultry, with eggs, with cassava flour, and etc., to replace what is imported. And ultimately, even, we're not ready yet, but soon, to add value to then export it to Europe. Not obviously in poultry, but more in cassava, nuts, and etc.
You mentioned that, of course, I mean, this is a business, right? You do want to make money. How profitable do you want to be?
That's a very good question. One of the, I'm not a communist, I'm not even a socialist, and I believe, in Adam Smith and profit making. However, one of the questions we should ask ourselves, and some people do, is how much is enough? When you see the objective of so many companies that every year we want to grow 30, 40, 50 basis points profitable level, when do you stop? When do you see it's enough? And this is why, each industry is different. I think in the food industry, if you are into, higher value, if you're doing 12 to 15%, I think EBITDA is more than enough. If you're in the commodities, it's more 5 to 8, 9% is more than enough. And I think what we should look at is growth, but growth at a given profitability. And this is why I tell our investors is we will give you a return on investment, but just be more patient, because in Africa and in the agriculture and food processing, things take time. And fair enough, not every investor is willing to be patient and is willing to be happy with a 10, 12, 13% return on invested capital. Then invest in something else.
And there's always this idea that, of course, the higher the margins, the more risk, right? So how do you manage that?
And I think that's one of the things which stops Africa growing, meaning that you need a new wave of investors who are willing to sacrifice part of the investment while thinking of the greater good of Africa and Africans, and B, having a very long-term future.
Is that hard to find?
People
that are really thinking with their heart, not with their bottom line.
It is less, but again, we're not talking about getting grants. We're not talking about, first of all, what is the interest rate today in Europe? So what are we talking about? People are now paying to put the money in banks. How sustainable is that? Now, yes, there's a risk in Africa, but there's also much better return potential. And politically, which politician in Europe or in America, by the way, is not worried about waves of migrants? How are we going to stop 1 billion Africans to come to Europe? If you're young, bachelor, and poor in Africa, why wouldn't you try your chance to Europe? I would do it.
And no jobs.
And no jobs. I would do it. The only way we're going to, how many, and can we welcome 200-300 million? Of course not. The only way to stop that, and we said building a wall is certainly not the solution, at least not in Europe, is to create jobs there, to give these people a reason to stay there.
And when you look for investments for your company, investors, how do you factor in the political instability? How do you manage this?
So I have a bit of a daring view on the so-called country risk. I don't really believe in the concept of country risk. I believe in the concept of partnership risk, meaning what I often tell to my board and other investors is the risk is not where you get married. The risk is who you get married with, meaning that like any business deal, the real tricky part is your partner. Who is your partner? Can you trust him? Can you rely on him? Do they have a track record in this country and so on? That's the main issue. Because yes, country, some are more risky than others, but I can tell you that we are, for example, quite heavily invested in Mozambique, which according to any ranking is one of the worst countries in the world, but we're doing well because we have great partners. And then we're doing, and we have good political relationships. So I would be careful, and I often say, are we saying that Europe and America don't have any problems? Yes, there's issue of bringing the money back, getting the money out, and etc. But honestly, there's very, very few countries where you never can get your money out. You always find solutions.
What about corruption?
Yeah, corruption is an issue, but I'd like to remind people to watch CNN or read their papers every day to remind them that Europe and America has plenty of examples of corruption. So I don't think, I would take it as frankly racism to accuse Africa to be the only place with corruption in the world. Corruption is probably more visible, but I think the number of cases in Congress and other places in America prove that even America is not free of corruption. So let's be careful before judging others.
Is this not something that comes into play in your daily business?
So it can come sometimes with, for example, ports, imports of equipment, etc. So we have to deal with it, and it takes usually, if you don't pay bribes, then it takes longer. So you just have to plan things with a longer time frame. But the good thing, at least in our industry, probably in other industry like mining, where you deal a lot with government, it's probably more tricky. When you deal with farmers and food, it's less obvious because basically, you deal with thousands of people who need you, and so it's not as prevalent and invasive as probably other industries.
And what about other large multinationals? Like, do you work also together now with Nestle or PepsiCo, or?
Yes, so we have.
How does that work?
We have Nestle and Pepsi as our customers. We sell them our grits and flour and whatever ingredients we produce. And at least the multinationals we're dealing with, I never even heard a case of corruption. I think large food companies at least are quite spared because they're too big and the countries need them too much to put them under pressure. I have not heard about that.
No, I just meant in terms of just dealings with them.
Yeah. Obviously large multinationals have a very profit-driven agenda, so they're a very tough negotiator, which I can understand from a business point of view, but again, if at the end of the day everybody's tough, how are we going to develop Africa? So that's always this dilemma of NGOs and helping while on the other side getting business results from a short-term basis at any cost, there needs to be a middle way. Mm-hmm. But call me a dreamer, maybe.
Speaking of your experience with large multinationals and now your own company, etc., how do you combine this idea of business and ethics? How do you do this on a daily basis? I mean, you want to make money, but you want to do good. How does that work?
Well, the sheer fact that you asked the question is actually quite worrying. Nothing wrong with you, but that's exactly the point. The point is, why does it have to be exclusive? And to me, that's the problem of the society we live in today, where extremes rule the day. Business-wise, socially, politically, religiously, extremes are gaining ground more and more. And that should not be the case. What's wrong? Again, business can be done. It is possible to make profit as long as you satisfy yourself with a decent level of profit and you have a longer horizon than most people. But what kind of business is sustainable if it's not ethical? You know, I don't know any. You can fool the people, you can fool New York Stock Exchange, you can fool a few people for a while. It can be a long while for some of them, but ultimately no. Mm-hmm. And I think what is really extraordinary, we live in a unique time where the people, millennials, but their parents and grandparents more and more, are putting such a pressure on companies that companies, willingly or unwillingly, are now being forced or willingly to change and become more sustainable, because the consumers, the people, do not accept to be fooled again. And I think that's the great news about the future, that people will change because there's no option.
All right, this is our final part of the Newsmaker with Roland Decorvet. He is chairman of Mercy Ship Switzerland, among other things, also CEO of Philafrica, based in South Africa. Now, we spent the first 3 parts of this series talking a lot about your business and about Africa, but now I want to hear more about you. Okay. Talk to me about, what is your philosophy about managing people? What's the most important thing for you?
I think clearly, first of all, I'd like to say that leadership evolves. I have a belief that, yes, some people are more gifted than others in terms of leading people, but I think your leadership, your leading philosophy evolves with time. I'm a completely different man than I was 10, 20 years ago, in this case even 5 years ago. I think also when you are in an environment like Africa, where communication is much more difficult, you cannot always have a good connection of internet and so on, so you rely on the human aspects of your team much more than I would say in any other environments where technology helps you. Yeah. So I think the key, I would say, probably the most important skills in my leadership style is the identify strong leaders, identify good lieutenants, select the right people for the right job. And I have a clear belief that, you know, everybody has talents. And if you look at my experience, most of the problems in any organization is usually have a mismatch between the individual talent and his or her job. So my job is to identify with your given skill, what should be your given job. And I think that's really what matters more. The rest is, you know, people are much smarter than me in terms of dealing with financials and building a factory and so on. But my job is to find these people.
And how much, if at all, do you embrace this concept of entrepreneurial management?
So first of all, I think very interesting question. I believe one of the biggest lie in the corporate world, and I know it's going to be a shocking statement, is a quote, we need you, regional CEO or country managing director, whatever, to be an entrepreneur. But I believe it's an oxymoron. Most multinational, most large companies cannot afford to have their people to be true entrepreneurs. So that's one of the things we're trying to do in Philafrica, and one of the things I learned I learned a lot of things in my previous life, but I also learned a lot of things on not what to do. And not what to do is tied the people, the local entrepreneur, with a lot of rules and regulations. And this is why when you basically have you acquire a company, you invest in a company, is how to make these companies as free and as entrepreneur as possible, of course with a minimal of supervision and rules and regulations, but to give as much freedom. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge in today's company with so many rules and so many conditions.
So it sounds like it's combining that hands-on with hands-off.
Yeah,
finding that balance.
Exactly, and I think, for example, talking about head office, you know, we are already in several countries and 20 factories and many companies, how to have as minimal as possible a head office. I believe the more you recruit people in a head office structure, the more these people need to justify their salary and create report and create conditions and create obstacles for the field people. So minimize your head office with a few people, highly specialized, to support the people on the field so that they feel truly free and feel supported and not being basically imposed upon by a overwhelming, administrative, hungry type of head office.
And how do you define success?
Okay, that's a tough question. I think success is achieving what you're dreaming for. I think success is making your life and your dream come true, whatever that might be, you know. And therefore, success is a verb declined in many different ways. Success for a business person might mean money or market share. Success for a doctor might be healing patients, and a success for a baker making the best bread on his street. So I think it's whatever you think is important to make you happy, if you achieve it, that's reaching a success.
What about failures? Because the Swiss have a perception of not dealing well with failure. And you as a Swiss, how do you do it?
I think, first of all, as a Swiss, we have tendency not to scream too much about our successes. It doesn't mean we're not proud. We can be very proud, but maybe in a more discreet way than maybe our American cousins or others. I think failures, that's one of the things, frankly, I admire with Americans. That they have this capacity to take a punch and they're on the floor and they stand back and continue and kind of continuing, not all, but many, to come back and try again. And I think in Europe, not specifically Switzerland, but Europe, we're a bit more easily depressed when we have a failure. So, I think that's something we need to learn. And, but okay, I think we're doing okay.
You told us in the beginning of the interview, when you were talking about your connection to Mercy Ship, your father was a pastor. What role has your religion, your faith, played in your career?
Well, faith played an important role in my youth because I had a dad who was a pastor and who was living his faith, so that I've never seen any contradiction between what he preached and what he lived, which I understand is not always the case, but it was the case in my family. And then after, through life, I had, time where faith played a more important, where it played a less important role in my life. And I think partly through my wife, I think I came back to a point where my decision to change work from Nestlé to go in the NGO world and then to start Philafrica, faith had an important part because it was about combining my faith and my belief with my skills, which was about food industry, and combining this in an African context. So again, I believe I was not called to be a pastor or a social worker, whatever, but I believe by my industrial business activities, I can help just as much people as any missionary, pastor, or social worker, but just in a different ways. And if on the way we can make money, then Hallelujah.
Now you're a father to 4 girls,
Yeah.
so you have your hands full, no doubt, and a full house. What are you telling them?
So yeah, I'm blessed with 4 girls who are amazing young ladies. What I tell them, especially, we've lived from leading a multi-billion-dollar business in China, having a life of princesses and luxury and wealth. And this is what it was so important to move to the ship, where we literally moved into a 50 square meter, 500 square feet cabin, bunk beds, where basically our whole apartment for more than a year was smaller than a garage in our Beijing mansion. And believe it or not, if you ask them today, that was the best year of their life, which is very interesting. So I think it was very important to come back to our roots, to what we believed in, and to take out all the superficial kind of things around us, to find us back as a family in an institution which was focused on helping others. Mm-hmm. And if I listen to them now, we're back in a bit of a luxury environment. Mm-hmm. I'm pleased to say that it's really about what can you do for the others? What can you do to advance your own dreams while trying to help others?
All right. I'd like to finish up now with a series of questions, and I want you to just give me the first answer that comes to your head. Ready?
Sure, shoot.
What is your idea of perfect happiness?
Being with my wife and kids and having more time with them and for them.
What is your greatest fear?
Failure.
It's like a good Swiss. What is your greatest extravagance?
House. I love beautiful houses and very, very well equipped and maintained. And I'm not into cars or other things, but I'm into a house.
Why?
I don't know, maybe because we travel so much, need to have roots. Maybe one day I'll do my psychological profile to understand.
Which talent would you like most to have?
Cooking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you can solve that with a couple lessons.
Oh, I think it's more than that.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
Having had the courage to leave Nestle and join Mercy Ships.
How long did that decision take to make? How long did you think about that?
It was boiling, or it was coming for quite a number of months. But I think at one point you realize your life is more than your bank account and what others perceive as success. And dare doing something completely different. Yeah.
Was there a moment, a catalyst?
Yes, there was one. I remember very clearly the moment where it was a combination of family life, which was reaching its end in terms of absolutely crazy traveling, working schedule, a need to find a bit stronger meaning to my life, the love, the need to go back to Africa. My kids I didn't see much, so it was a combination of different things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. What is your most marked characteristic?
Passionate, for good and bad.
What is your greatest regret?
Not to have married my wife earlier. Yeah, it's true.
I'll make sure to tell her that. And what is your motto?
Who dares wins.
And the most important lesson you learned from the 2008 financial crisis?
When everybody is happy for too long, start worrying and sell.
Final question, cash or electronic?
Cash, especially today. Cash is king.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Roland,
Thank
for
you.
your time and for being our newsmaker. It was a real pleasure.
Okay, my pleasure.